is going on with Yamaha these days? We all thought the R1 was going to be removed from the lineup because of crazy-ass Euro 6 emissions and people saying you can't sell it as a street-legal model. They're floundering in World Superbike, but they had to update it somehow. And then we got this news. A new R1 was released for 2025. And honestly, the release of the new R1 kind of left us with more questions than answers. The newest iteration of the flagship Superbike is going to be shipped to the US as a street legal model, but in Europe will be sold as a track-only variant. So it begs the question, is a 2025 R1 a worthwhile upgrade, or are you being duped by the winglet effect? And is this bike just a placeholder until we get that R9, which by the time this video comes out, we've probably heard a bunch about that, so please don't at me in the comments about the R9 we work a few weeks back here at Yami Noob, I'm sorry. And is this all just waiting around until Yamaha ultimately reveals a V4 Superbike that's maybe going to be based loosely on the new V4 MotoGP bike? And what is the future of Superbikes in general? There's a lot to talk about today. Let's get into it. Okay, so one of the biggest reasons people thought that the R1 was going to be axed and discontinued was because that's what happened with the R6, which is weird because it was the most winningest 600 Supersport bike and arguably the best 600 that's ever existed. But waning sales and emissions choking these bikes out basically made it impossible to keep selling them, and honestly, waning interest in the platform, as you could just go and buy an old one that was basically the same, caused the death knell of the R6. The R6 was replaced with the R7, and a lot of diehard fast boys said this is not a real replacement for this motorcycle, and I can understand that. So earlier this year, when Yamaha released a statement saying that the R1 would not meet new emissions regulations in Europe, we all kind of just assumed that that was the beginning of the end. Yamaha explicitly said that the decision to discontinue the motorcycle in Europe was due to declining consumer demand and harder to meet emissions regulations, which just means that we get a little bit more freedom here in the US and we're gonna keep yeeting ourselves with Superbikes. And Yamaha was probably like, man, we love selling these R1s to kids who have no business buying them and then go to 180 miles per hour on the highway as a 19-year-old kid. It's probably the core demographic for R1s at this point. That and 43-year-old insurance salesmen who take club racing way too seriously. That's also the other core demographic of R1 buyers. And they'll definitely let you know in the comments how serious they are about their R1. But truthfully, it's easy to see why this is happening. Younger riders don't have as much money, they're more safety conscious, and yeah, a 200 plus horsepower superbike doesn't make a lot of sense. There's been huge industry shifts towards these more practical motorcycles, as boring as they may be. Whether we like it or not, winter is coming. That means for many riders, they'll be putting up their bikes for the winter and switching out their riding gear for some cold weather gear. While I'm lucky enough to live in Texas, where I get to ride motorcycles year-round, we still get some instances of inclement weather. Rainstorms or the occasional ice storms put a damper on my riding as well, so when I'm not on my bike, I want some footwear that can help keep me safe and comfortable during those winter months. Versys reached out and offered to let me try out their Stormburst shoe. These shoes are the perfect hybrid sneaker that offer waterproof protection and the superior grip with the slim, lightweight profile of a sneaker instead of a clunky winter boot. And they're great for everything from walking around town on rainy days or hiking some trails when it might be wet and muddy. Being in Texas, traditional winter boots are totally overkill for most of the time, so the Versys Stormburst shoes work perfectly to keep my feet dry and protected while offering everyday comfort and usability. So if you need a shoe that can help you conquer the impending winter months, definitely check out the Versys Stormburst. They're warm, waterproof, and have superior grip for your winter activities. Hit the link in the description box to check out Versys and find the perfect blend of style and practicality in shoes designed for winter getaway, and enjoy an instant 15% off your first order at checkout. Thanks so much to Versys for the support on today's video. Now let's get back into it. But then the general manager of production design at Yamaha did confirm that a new R1 was in development. He had a quote that I found interesting. It is the flagship. It's the symbolic motorcycle. Even if you didn't sell a single motorcycle, it still has meaning by existing. And I gotta say, I really like that quote. I can really understand that from a philosophical perspective. A motorcycle like that should exist to show what is possible. It's why we love prototype racing in MotoGP, isn't it? It's the bleeding edge of performance. It's the pinnacle of what we can do as a species with two-wheeled racing. And this got us all really excited. I thought that the Yamaha R1 was going to come back with an updated frame, a zestier engine, more aggressive, give it kind of like a CBR Triple R SP Fireblade treatment, you know, make something really full zoot. Because honestly, the R1 is getting a little long in the tooth. The design still looks phenomenal for what it is. It's aged beautifully, but that frame and motor are basically from 2015. And when you're going up against V4Rs from 2023 and 2024 that have been updated every other year because Ducati has Volkswagen and Audi money to throw at their projects, it gets a little harder and harder to compete. To be honest, it's a small miracle that Toprak won the championship in 2021. Although in theory, he did compete closely with Jonathan Rea on the Kawasaki, which was also a Japanese bike, but you then saw the domination of Ducati for the next couple of years, now BMW with Toprak, and the Japanese bikes have really been left in the dust, both in Superbike and in MotoGP, which is a bummer. So the news then came out that the 2025 R1 was going to come out for the market, and it wasn't exactly all new. The bike remains largely unchanged except for gigantic, obnoxious winglets that are only going to help in World Superbike racing and better brakes. Finally, the R1 had woeful factory brakes. So essentially a 10-year-old motorcycle with Temu winglets thrown at it and better brakes is not exactly the new flagship bike we were all hoping for. But the interesting thing is that Yamaha has committed an insane amount of resources to try to succeed in MotoGP. While Yamaha's Superbike legacy is a little tenuous at best, their success in MotoGP can certainly be attributed to Valentino Rossi, Jorge Lorenzo, and as of recently, Fabio Quartararo in 2021. They have winning pedigree. The fact that they're paying Fabio like $12 million a year to ride their bike because he is definitely one of the best God-given talents on the grid currently just shows you an iota of the commitment that they have. Combine that with the fact that next year Pramac is going to have satellite Yamahas on the squad, it's going to be a Yamaha fest. And then we got news that Yamaha's ditching the inline 4 configuration in MotoGP and finally going for a V4. They're saying that as early as 2025, that bike will be on the grid. So imagine 4 Yamahas on the grid, full factory support with a brand new engine, a V4 to compete in the category and do it proper. That's super exciting, but that takes a tremendous amount of commitment. To lure away Pramac, a team that is currently succeeding with Jorge Martin and may take the championship this year in 2024 away from Ducati and go to Yamaha, they must have paid them a pretty penny. But that's what happens when you have a Japanese conglomerate who is willing to put it all on the line to actually win. Honda, are you listening? And one of the interesting things about this too is that despite the fact that Yamaha is going to go V4 in MotoGP, there are some rumors that it's like, oh, maybe we're going to get a V4 R1 for the street. I don't really think that's going to happen for several reasons. The first is the fact that Honda's been using a V4 in their MotoGP program for, 15 years at this point? 14 years, something like that? The RC213V. They've been using V4 configurations to race all the time, but their flagship CBR 1000 was never a V4. They did sell other V4 products like the VFR 750, they had twin-cylinder bikes like the RC51, but they never sold a V4 racing top-end motorcycle in 1000cc category just because they made a MotoGP bike. And I'd like to think that Yamaha's probably going to do the same thing. Combine that with the fact that in 2027, MotoGP is going to go through a gigantic rules change regulation. They're already just planning to create an 850cc V4 for the MotoGP bike. I think it's very unlikely we're going to get anything related to the road bike, which is interesting because one of the biggest talking points that Dorna introduced for the 2027 regulations was more road relevancy with kind of less ride height devices, less aero, and more normal motorcycles. But these bikes' engines are not going to have anything in common with road-going bikes. You know, you think about the Ducati V4R in World Superbike, you can go buy a V4 on the factory showroom floor, they're pretty close. You're not going to have that with Yamaha. Now, going back to Yamaha's street lineup, with the R6 getting axed and the R1 being sold as a somewhat updated model, the sport bike lineup that they have is a bit strange. Now again, this video was made before I got all the information about the R9, so you guys are already talking about it in the comments down below, but their lineup is going to be the R3, the R7, the R9, and probably the R1 here in the United States until they don't sell them anymore or massively update it into something else. Now, because the R1 is so long in the tooth, This kind of makes the R9 the new king of the castle, in my opinion. Yes, you can go and buy an R1 with winglets and all this other stuff, but to me, that starts to feel more like the Suzuki way of thinking, where you're just going to keep selling an older bike that has crazy R&D already paid for 20 years ago. And now the R9 is going to share platforming with the MT09 motorcycle, and that's going to be great. It's going to be a torquey, fun motorcycle, and it's going to fit in the new generation super sport category. The R7 and R9 are cross-platformed with naked bikes, and the R3 is pretty much the same thing with the MT03. It's not really a race-derived product. The only real race-derived homologated product that Yamaha is going to sell is the R1 in this new updated winglet and better brake configuration. Now, those of you who follow World Superbike will know that Yamaha's problem is not just winglets and better brakes. They quite simply need more horsepower to compete against the way faster BMWs and Ducatis on the grid. Now, I also think that they need a proper pilot at the helm to take them to a championship like Toprak did in 2021. Without that, you're going to have a tough time, but Yamaha should have no trouble luring proper talent. I mean, Jonathan Rea is currently on the bike, and if the bike can pick up a couple more ponies, maybe it'll be competitive, but I don't really think winglets are the thing that's going to magically make the R1 into a class-leading competitor in World Superbike currently. It's just simply way too stacked right now. And it kind of begs the question, what the heck is the future of superbikes here anyways? You know, we're being able to sell them in the United States simply because of emissions regulations, but people don't really buy these things anymore. Superbikes are from a time when you had massive disposable income, easy credit, and you kind of felt like the bottom would never fall out. Think post 9/11 America, where you had McMansions and bling wrap and, you know, fast food everywhere. It was just a different time. And that's why I really think something like the R9 is going to become the standard bearer for Yamaha's kind of top end of the sport bike category. Something usable, fun, torquey, still good, and still relatively value driven because it's cross-platformed with a naked bike first. We're probably never going to see a race-derived product being built from the ground up from Yamaha ever again. I think we're only ever going to get naked bikes that get turned into sport bikes, and maybe you'll have a flagship superbike just because they need to exist, which again, coolest quote I've ever heard from Yamaha. But with the customers dwindling for these motorcycles, I can't really see a market really being made. And with MotoGP getting more and more advanced and more crazy, it's going to mimic F1 more than World Superbike. And even though Dorna says that they want more road relevancy for their motorcycles on the grid, in my opinion, they're getting less and less road relevant with super exotic engine configurations, crazy aerodynamics, and insane features that you're never going to see trickle down to any sort of street bike. So, what do you guys think about the current state of the superbike market and the world? Do you think that the R1 is just a cheapo winglet and brake project? Are you excited for the R9? I bet you are, and you're already typing comments about it. I am very excited about that motorcycle too. Give us a little bit of a chance to make videos about it. I promise you we will. And make sure you stay tuned with all things here, Yami Noob. We'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.
Oh, I love being here inside of the warm embryonic fluid of Valentino Rossi. Me and him just sharing foods together. Maybe he's gonna eat some pizza or some pasta here in the hills of Tavullia. But you know where else it's nice and warm and cozy is this next episode of Yami Noob. You can click on right over here. I'd love for you to watch it. But anyways, I'm gonna stay here hanging out. Me and him might go onto the track later, but I'll catch you guys later.